Thanks so much. And I really wanted to thank Code Red and Wildlife Works for inviting the Air Resources Board to talk today. I know that many of you here are very engaged at the UN FCCC context in terms of pushing forward on REDD policy and making incredible actions at the international level. So I don't want to focus too much on that because you know more than I do since I'm here with the state. But I do want to note that from the Cancun to the Durban platform and Qatar, there's been indication in the UN context and UN documents that subnational actions are important as well to addressing and moving forward on REDD. So that's the context I'm here from. I think the EPA is up at a 30,000 foot. Projects are doing on the ground level. California, maybe we're about 20,000 feet, so maybe 15. I just want to provide a brief background on the Air Resources Board's climate program and cap and trade regulation, since that's where REDD could fit into our program. Discuss some of the work we've done with other jurisdictions related to REDD, and hopefully that'll give you a sense of where we are. And also, just before I go further, I'm not the only staff counsel at the Air Resources Board, I'm just one of them. So ARB is our acronym, so I'll use that since it's shorter. We're the state agency that's charged with leading California's fight against air pollution. We set and enforce our state air quality standards and the rules to achieve and reduce air pollution. We work within the construct of the Federal Clean Air Act and also within the construct of California air resources laws and local laws. Using a science-based approach, ARB works to protect public health by setting in place measures that clean California's air and cut climate emissions. Our clean air initiatives and other environmental programs often become the topic of discussion and templates for programs nationally and internationally. We're overseen by a governor-appointed 12-member board, and we have about 1,200 employees, including professional scientists, economists, policy experts, and lawyers like me. So I was at a conference last week, and I tried to do a lawyer joke. The laughs came after I apologized for doing a joke. So today, I promise you no lawyer jokes. In 2006, our legislature passed Assembly Bill 32, or AB 32. It's also called the California Global Warming Solutions Act. Now, AB 32 expanded ARB's clean air mission to include mitigation of climate change. And working with our sister agencies across the California administration, we're making very good progress in terms of achieving the goals of AB 32 and addressing this from the California context. AB 32 requires that California reduce our greenhouse gas emissions statewide to 1990 levels by 2020. It also required us to develop a scoping plan, which we did in 2008. This plan set forth many different measures, regulatory and otherwise, to achieve those 2020 limits, including a mandatory greenhouse gas reporting and verification program, standards for low carbon fuel, an advanced clean cars program, and our market-based cap and trade program, among other measures. In addition to the goals set forth in AB 32, California also has an additional goal of achieving 80% reductions from the 1990 level by 2050. For those who don't know, just a really quick update on our background on our cap and trade program. The cap and trade program sets an aggregate declining cap on the amount of greenhouse gas emissions that may be emitted by covered entities and allows those covered entities to trade in emissions allowances and other compliance instruments to meet their obligations. The program allows the use of offset credits as one type of compliance instrument, and that's I think what we're all here to talk about today. In our program, offsets can come from various sources. The first of those can come from ARB-issued offset credits that would come from an ARB-approved compliance offset protocol. These protocols set standards from which projects can try to meet the standards if they wish to seek crediting. We have 4 existing protocols that we've adopted thus far. They're all domestic to the US. They include US forests, urban forests, the destruction of ozone-depleting substances, and livestock manure digesters. Again, these are for the moment, these are the only areas in which compliance credits can come in to be used. We've begun work engaging stakeholders on the development of 2 potential new protocols. These include the destruction of methane from rice cultivation and the destruction of methane from coal mines. Again, these are based in the US. Second, offset credits may come from a linked jurisdiction. So I'm very excited to announce that on Friday, our board approved a regulation to link with the government of Quebec. So to link our emissions trading system with the emissions trading system in Quebec. offsets that are in Quebec's program, once these are linked, could then come into our program. And the third area in which offset credits can come would be from sector-based crediting programs. These would be from subnational jurisdictions in developing countries and would be based on a particular sector. I'll talk more about what our regulation sees by those sectors in a moment. It is important to note and remember that offset credits can only be used for up to 8% of a compliance obligation in the program, so it's a fairly limited amount that can be used. And any offset has to be real, additional, permanent, verifiable, quantifiable, and enforceable. You heard those from a lot of other folks today, and I dare you to say that 10 times fast. But those are really the criteria that come from the international context down into our regulation and at the project level as well. And those are really the critical pieces under AB 32 that any offset, whether it's an ARB issued offset, an offset from a linked jurisdiction, or an offset from an approved sector-based program would have to meet. As a subnational government within our federal system, California has been engaged in discussions with other subnational governments in terms of greenhouse gas reduction programs and in particular on REDD. AB 32 actually contemplated this type of engagement when it directed ARB to consult with other jurisdictions to facilitate the development of integrated and cost-effective regional, national, and greenhouse gas reduction measures. This direction forms part of the authority for ARB to engage in the Western Climate Initiative, which includes our now linked partner in Quebec, as well as discussions with other jurisdictions. In addition to our WCI, the Western Climate Initiative, lots of acronyms in government, apparently in other areas as well, as Joanna was describing. The cap and trade regulation also directly contemplates credits coming from what I termed sector-based crediting programs. Now, this is a program which is a greenhouse gas emissions reduction crediting mechanism established by a country, region, or subnational jurisdiction in a developing country and covering a particular economic sector within that jurisdiction. A program's performance would be based on achievement towards an emission reduction target, again, a sector-wide baseline or reference level, within the boundaries of that jurisdiction. So I think, and Mike was talking about the top-down versus bottom-up approach. The way I kind of see this is a hybrid. We're looking at not necessarily a national or international-wide context, but looking at subnational jurisdictions. For the lawyers in the room, the provisions in the regulation which set forth how we could approve eventually a sector-based program are in sections 95991 and 95995. Those are my only citations I'll give today. So, although I have the regulation if anyone's interested. Within this framework, REDD is the only sector that's been called out in the regulation. So we actually, when we adopted the cap and trade regulation, sent the market signal, since this is a compliance market program, that we're interested in seeing what could be done with REDD through a regulatory context. We decided to focus on REDD for many of the reasons we've all heard today. I mean, greenhouse gas emissions from the forest sector and from all land uses, as you've heard, about 20% of global emissions, which exceeds that coming from the entire global transportation sector. So that's really the main reason why we're looking at this, in addition to the possible other multiple benefits that can come out of it. While REDD credits and all international credits are not currently allowed in our program, our framework sets a framework for ARB to contemplate whether such credits could meet the rigorous AB 32 criteria and how they could provide incentives for developing countries to design emission reduction programs that are really of high quality. Any program would need to be approved by our board, as I mentioned earlier, and that goes through our comment process and rigorous rulemaking process. I'd like to note that this type of sector of jurisdiction-wide program is different from the traditional REDD program context we've been hearing about. But under the framework, a jurisdiction could account for projects in that jurisdiction through accounted nesting provisions, similar to what the VCS has done in their jurisdictional nested accounting initiative. Projects continue, obviously, to provide extremely important lessons. I think we've heard from Mama Mercy in terms of the lessons that are coming from one particular project. And on a really quick personal side note, when I was in college, I spent a summer semester studying human-wildlife conflict near the project that Wildlife Works has in between Amboseli and Tsavo West National Parks. So the pictures that were there just brought back a really great amount of memories. I also served in the Peace Corps doing environmental education, so the school pictures were also bringing back some memories. All right, back to script, sorry. So we've included this jurisdiction sector-wide program possibility because we believe that the design helps reduce concerns related to emissions leakage that may exist at the project context, looking more at a broader scale. And it leverages a larger array of emissions reduction activities and environmental and social benefits to those communities. And these issues really form the basis of our engagement with other jurisdictions related to REDD. We've got some general regulatory elements that would have to be part of the program. You've heard a lot about these from Joanna and from others, including a sector plan, a reference level. So I won't go really into depth in those. But we do include those same kind of provisions in terminology in our regulation. Program would have to include a rigorous public participation and consultation process. This ensures that at the jurisdiction-wide level, any community that really didn't want to be involved in a jurisdiction program wouldn't have to be. And this is one of the main confusions I think that's coming up in terms of thinking about sector versus project versus some of the bad examples of REDD projects that have come out. And I think, as Jared mentioned, describing the benefits and the possibilities of a well-designed project or program are really important. And folks that are coming to talk to us or talking to our federal counterparts, they don't always understand the nuances. And we don't always either. So it's really important for folks that are working on this to help message that and explain it in a way that shows the possible benefits that can come from a well-designed program. Again, if we decide to pursue a program, we would have to undergo an additional rulemaking regulatory step to design sector-specific requirements for REDD in our regulation and assess any potential partner for a jurisdiction-wide program. There's an additional quantitative usage limit below the 8% amount for all offsets. We would allow sector-based credits to come in at about 2% of a compliance obligation in the first 2 compliance periods and 4% in the third. So it's a limited amount that could come into the program if we approve a REDD program, but we hope it sends a signal in terms of the market potential for other markets and for other activities. Really quickly, I'll go over some of the work that we've done with other jurisdictions. California's been engaged since 2008 in the Governor's Climate and Forest Task Force, or the GCF for the acronym, which now includes 19 member states and provinces from around the world, including jurisdictions like Mexico, Peru, Brazil, Nigeria, Spain, Indonesia, and the US. We've also participated in a smaller group through a memorandum of understanding with Chiapas, Mexico, and Acre, Brazil. This relates to the REDD Offset Working Group, which was referenced earlier. And that working group is made up of technical experts from the 3 jurisdictions who are developing recommendations to the 3 jurisdictions as to what elements should be included in a subnational sector-wide program if the jurisdictions decide to go that route. My understanding is those recommendations are currently out for public comment. So if folks are interested, I'd encourage you to send in your comments to them. We will be presented with those comments in final form, with the recommendations in final form, likely at the end of May or sometime in June. And while ARB doesn't anticipate and doesn't expect that the recommendations will solve every issue that's related to REDD, we really do look forward to looking at what they say. It's been a long 2-year process for the experts that are involved in this. Many of them have experience working in jurisdictions around the world that have REDD projects. Finally, and I'll end soon because I know I'm standing in the way of you and coffee. It seems clear that global efforts to reduce greenhouse gas emissions need to include efforts to reduce deforestation and forest degradation. Given the limited portion of our program that could potentially come from REDD, ARB anticipates and hopes that there are broader actions that go on to make sure this becomes a robust program through projects, through sector-wide crediting, through a broad range of voluntary and compliance measures. And it's also important to continually remind ourselves that these efforts at improving forest management and conservation need to have multiple benefits for the communities living within them. That's the only way to ensure that there's an engagement, that there's permanence in terms of the reductions, and that the communities there benefit from the program. ARB understands, and it sounds like there was a protest this morning in San Francisco, that there are concerns that continually are raised in terms of REDD projects. And I think there are some examples that these concerns are based on. But the amount of progress that's been made in recent years, including on rigorous monitoring, verification, and reporting through enhanced satellite programs, through enhanced carbon monitoring from LIDAR and from ground-based monitoring, is really impressive. And the investment that's been made on the government and private sector level, as we've heard from some of the folks here in this room, is closing those science gaps, really showing us what can be done and whether this can come into a compliance market program and a regulatory scheme. I'll end by noting that while ARB, we don't have a timeline in terms of when we could consider bringing in compliance credits from any specific program or jurisdiction. ARB staff has been directed to prepare an informational report to our board, setting forth the efforts we've done to date through the Governor's Climate and Forest Task Force, looking at the recommendations coming from the REDD Offset Working Group, and presenting this information to our board. This is not a rulemaking action. We're not proposing any regulatory text. We'll be seeking information or seeking direction from our board as to where they would like to see us go as we continue our efforts. This report will be sometime later this year, and it's really the next step in our process of evaluating REDD. Sector-based crediting, and specifically jurisdiction-wide REDD programs, is something that is contemplated in our cap and trade regulation because of the important greenhouse gas, cost containment features, and multiple benefits that could stem from a well-designed program. Determining whether accepting credits from such a program is possible remains a challenging but exciting prospect. Thank you.